as I was saying, I'm the editor of this book, Gregory Nalpon's The Wayang at 8 Milestone. I just wanted to say a few words about this book and then perhaps read a few excerpts from it. So how did I come to put this book together? Well, let's say, how long ago was it? Maybe 4 years ago, I came across a story called The Rose and the Silver Key, and I was so kind of gobsmacked by it, just to use an intellectual term, that I was desperate to find more of Gregory Nalpon's stuff. Somewhere Robert Yeo had written to say that there were more unpublished kind of manuscripts, but where were they? For 4 years I looked, and then finally, through that magical machine called the internet, I was able to contact the Nalpon family, and they were very kind. Even though they were very wary of me initially, they showed me, particularly Gregory Nalpon's daughter, Jacinta Nalpon, an awful lot of material, and some of it is in this volume, but there's an awful lot more to come. Anyway, I just want to read perhaps one or two passages and talk about them, so, some examples. It's been very difficult because to me they all seem absolutely brilliant, but I've just chosen some here that are short, mercifully short perhaps in this context, to read out. One of Gregory Nalpon's friends, Patrick Zender, has been very kind as well and shared his memories of Gregory Nalpon. And once, the first time I met Patrick Zender, he took me to a coffee shop close to, where was it, Lavender MRT. It was just a bus ride away. And Patrick was explaining that these were the places that Gregory Nalpon, who in some ways you could talk about as a kind of hobo or bum or rebel, a very eloquent hobo or bum or rebel, used to enjoy being. He used to like to soak up the atmosphere there, and that's where he wrote an awful lot of his stories. So I want to start by reading The Coffee Shop on the Sea. Okay, if we can just find it. Yes, 47. Okay, Coffee Shop on the Sea. The coffee shop is a wooden one, and it stands on the sea, which whispers and breathes underneath. It is a few feet below road level, small and compact. Its roof planks are nailed closely together and covered with zinc sheets. There are 5 tables inside, with round stools and a mahjong table near the door in the corner that opens out above the sea. The walls are cut horizontally in half. The windows and sheets of green canvas are rolled and tied above them to be let down when the wind blows cold with drops of rain and salty sea spray. A counter stands in the corner of the open entrance. There is no other door except the one opening out above the sea, where it is good to stand and breathe in the salt air and see the junks and bumboats moored to stakes driven into the seabed. A mirror is fixed on the far wall, big and broad and sometimes flattering to look into. There are 2 soft drink advertisements flanking the mirror, showing pretty girls with nice legs sipping their favourite drink. Shirts and pants drape the open space between the advertisements, hiding a small red fire extinguisher and an old cork lifebelt. A wire net basket of eggs hangs from the ceiling planks. A pressure lamp, white and bright and with a big hiss, lights the drinkers, sipping black sweet coffee. It's funny how many times pressure lamps seem to appear in these stories, twinkling away. A very different kind of Singapore. And all the while there is the soft murmur of talk, like the sea talking among the stakes under the shop. This is the time when great and serious things are spoken, about business, the government, fish, love, life, and sometimes about God, in a very straight, simple and sincere manner. The plump Chinese proprietor with a smile-crinkled face and balding head always reads a Chinese newspaper. He seldom speaks, he always bows and smiles and stares intently at his newspaper, minding his own business and allowing his business to take care of him, giving him a small but definite income. A fishing net and outboard motor lean against the wall behind the counter, on top of which are a thick row of biscuits in bottles. Just a moment. Most nights, the clouds above the coffee shops would be like the hard, curving ribs of sand on the beach at low tide, and the stars would look out from between the white ribs. To the left of the coffee shop, a hut was built on the sea wall like a square, squat box with walls made of uneven pieces of plank and tin nailed together. The roof is of rusty, rotten zinc and tin sheets. A long, heavy, squared-edged log had been placed outside this hut facing the sea, and the two men who sleep in the hut at night sit on the log in the shadows and stare into the sea, listening to the sucking, squelching sound of water against the sea wall and the slapping sweet as it swirls round the closely packed stakes of the wooden pier that slopes into the sea. The blue road lights from behind them softly light up part of the sea around the stakes and silhouette the small boats tugging at their anchor chains. They hear the sounds of the cars approaching and passing on the road behind like the drone of beetles around a lighted lamp at night. Old poles and planks, round and black in all shapes and sizes, lean against the hut and lie in their own black shadow on the ground in front of the coffee shop. The two men sit on these logs until late at night, resting completely and not talking, yawning comfortably now and then snuggling into more comfortable positions on the log with their backs against the huts. Through half-closed eyes they watch a man lying flat on a log close to them, busy with his thoughts. They watch the ripples of light on the black water, moving like silent music. Whether these things move the men to deep feeling or not, no one can tell. But they watch the yellow of the big ships lit up out at sea, and the old lady with short legs and shiny baggy black trousers who stares suspiciously at them as she passes by every night, wondering what mischief they are up to. Sometimes they smile in the shadows at the old lady, then look up at the whirling weather vane on the top of the hut, spinning in the fickle breeze, so as not to meet her gaze. From the road behind them you can see the lighted coffee shop, the wooden pier, the square boxed hut, and the two men in the shadows. And if you stop and look and try to feel in a little way as they do, you cannot help feeling the warm, comfortable glow of peace, like a nice hot drink on a cold, wet day. Okay, to steal a phrase from Bowie Kim Cheng, I mean, it's wonderful to read this, and you think, retrospectively, it's kind of nostalgia. This seems as lost as the libraries of Alexandria, this kind of image of Singapore. I think it's just wonderful that you come across these images. Coffee shops on the sea, they appear frequently in Gregory Nalpon's stories. Okay, moving on to one more. Two Faces I wanted to read now. And the reason I wanted to touch on this is the fact that one of the things that I like about Gregory Nalpon's writing, which seems to separate him from writers of that time, is that perhaps he's writing from the margins, but he's also somebody who seems to be quite socially and politically engaged. Perhaps you know that he was a lawyer who worked for the unions. He was a unionist at a time in which, arguably, perhaps this is a kind of a controversial point, but you know, at this time the unions were being smashed by certain powers that be, and in a way Nalpon was kind of swimming against the tide, you know, with his kind of social vision. Okay, so I wanted to read Two Faces. One night in Singapore, 38 years ago, when Ahmad Jafar was a child, he found a twisted rough tree with a hollow at the level of his eyes. The hollow was the size of a street lamp bulb, and standing on tiptoe he saw that it was a cave with snake-smooth walls and a flat floor of wood dust. Ahmad Jafar scraped a piece of green moss from an old stone wall nearby and fitted it onto the floor of the hollow. He plucked small toadstools from a rotted chunk of wood and planted them in patterns on the moss. He tore rose petals. He blew them into the hollow where they settled gently in between the toadstools on the moss. And when the moon soaked the earth with a silver mist, he caught a shimmering dewdrop on a caladium leaf and tipped it onto the moss in the hollow. In the morning he rushed to see if elves had danced in the place he had prepared for them, but no one had been there, nor a thing had even sipped at the dewdrop among the flowers on the green moss in between the toadstools. 2 days later he found a dead sparrow on the ground, lying on its back, its legs folded against its breast, and its eyes were covered with wrinkled grey skin. He placed the sparrow in the hollow and blocked it up with clay to keep out the elves. So first typo in this book that I've spotted perhaps is that there's supposed to be a kind of space here. So I'll mark that space by taking a small drink, if that's all right. Okay, and perhaps that's something kind of significant in some ways, is the fact that Robert Yeo's phrase, I think in the blurb here, he talks about Gregory Nalpon being Singapore's first kind of magical realist, perhaps in some ways. And perhaps I don't know if that's particularly correct or helpful. I think it is helpful in some kind of way, but you can see what he's getting at. It's kind of interesting that you have such a fusion in this writing, perhaps between the quotidian and something, what should we say, unseen. To use unseen, not in the MOE sense, but in another sense. Okay. When Solomon was a boy, 32 years ago, he packed a shirt and a nice cake in a bag. Before he left his house, he travelled in his mind to a country he had read about in his geography book, and then slipped into his mother's room and kissed her sleeping cheek. He carried all his school books under his arm and walked to the beach and threw them into the sea, and he laughed loudly so that the night would understand his scorn for conventional things. He walked down the road until he felt tired and decided to rest under a tree until his legs stopped aching. When he woke up, his clothes were damp with dew and his teeth rattled with the cold of the morning. When he reached home, his father and mother were still sleeping. He changed his clothes and hid like a frightened puppy under the folds of his blanket. He received a caning an hour later for losing his books, which had cost a total of $21.50. I tell you these things about Ahmed Jafar and Suleiman, so that you might understand the nature of their real selves at a time when they were innocent, at a time before they walked through the passage of the years like a field of wild grass, their souls like their trouser legs pierced by hundreds of sharp yellow grass seeds, which they found difficult to brush off because they had to be extracted one by one and gently. The grass seeds were the deviated principles and ideals studying their souls as they grew to be men in a world that forcibly changed them to what they are at this time. Today, Ahmed Jafar is a confidence trickster, still serving a prison sentence. Suleiman is in the civil service. Okay, and just one more, and then I want to hand over to Cyril, who's kindly come to read. And I wanted to read next a short piece called The River People. It's a very short piece, and one reason I like it is because in a way, Nalpon kind of stresses the local, and I like the local in a time where in Singapore everything seems to be losing its localness. In the 6 or 7 years I've been here, it's almost like Singapore has become unrecognisable from 2007, let alone the 1960s. So in a way I like this because it talks about Bedok. Yay, Bedok is where I came from originally when I first lived in Singapore, and now I'm exiled to Choa Chu Kang, the wild, wild west, which is a fate worse than something anyway. But not to run down the west or whatever, but you know, there is a yearning for Bedok and the east and something primal. But also again in this story, how it touches on the quotidian, but also again the unseen.